Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the ECR group for inviting me to speak. I think it's particularly important that UK business has a voice during these vital discussions, both now and in the future. So I represent an organization that some here may be aware of called the Institute of Directors. We're the UK's oldest business organization, and we pride ourselves in attempting to make the UK, the EU, and the world economies better places to do business, as lofty as that sounds. We do this by arguing for policy decisions that foster a business climate favorable to entrepreneurial activity and wealth creation. So there are three main facts about the IOD that I hope will be both memorable and informative before I continue on to the panel discussion that we're talking about. So we represent 35,000 business leaders spread across the UK's business spectrum and the country itself. These directors head firms that range from a FTSE 100 Edinburgh-based company to a one-man startup in Shoreditch. Our membership is fairly representative of the UK's economy. 70% of our members are SMEs, 56% of our members export, and the geographic location of our membership tends to resemble the UK's economy. And finally, we have a mandate to act in the public interest. So this balancing act between member views and public good allows us to engage on a range of important issues and to take a fairly objective stance. So these facts in mind, I'm going to say three main things about the topic that we're discussing, that of how the West can unite to face global economic challenges. First, I want to quickly challenge the idea that unity is the key to confronting global challenges, because I think there are certain areas where unity is important that have been touched on, areas like product standards, but others where it is not, like employment legislation and how labor markets work, for instance. As some of my fellow panelists, have noted, TTIP is a key tool for the EU and the US to unite together via common standards and regulations in order to allow firms in each area to compete with each other. This competition, in turn, will make firms in both regions more competitive globally. Competition may destroy firms in each area because Maryland produces better crabs than the UK does, and because the French produce better sparkling wine than California. But this will also ensure that the best firms survive, and these firms tend to trade globally if given the opportunity. So having a level playing field between two of the world's main economic areas will allow for resilience in the face of global economic challenges, while a disunity of things like how labor markets work can help to ensure that countries adjust to their local, regional, and global circumstances. Second, and this has been touched on by some of my other fellow panelists, the curse of going last, but economic interlinkages between two areas of the world, like the EU and North America, that share similar values like free markets and democracy can help spread those values elsewhere. And these ideas are usually spread best through economic ties. The very idea of the EU is founded upon making France and Germany so interlinked that the thought of them going to war again would be unthinkable. So as China begins to flex its economic muscles in its region, for example, its approach to things like the rule of law and property rights may become the regional norm and undermine the global economic order that has underpinned much of the economic growth we've seen in the 70 years since World War II. And this makes it difficult for businesses to operate in trickier places in the world, but it also makes it important that the West looks east in its approach to facing global economic challenges. And finally, I think we need to question the idea of the West, because it assumes that the US has the same strategic aims as the EU, when the passage of TPP can undermine that view somewhat. And there are also internal divisions between the EU within the EU, as we're all aware, that can inhibit trade deal brokerage. German and Austrian opposition to TTIP, for example, but also protected national industries and sectors. Therefore, I think it's important that the EU unites to broker trade agreements more generally rather than with a focus strictly on the West, as it were, given that the US is doing the same and pursuing its own strategic goals. The American pivot to Asia is not just geopolitical, it's geoeconomic. There is no reason, however, that the EU cannot do the same. In reality, the longer it takes for the EU to negotiate trade agreements, the more ammunition it gives to anti-EU groups that argue individual countries, like the UK, can do better on their own. So I'm just going to briefly close by highlighting two things. First, the West has united before in times of global economic challenges. When the financial crisis began in 2008, central banks in North America, Europe, coordinated monetary policy to cushion the blow at a time when beggar-thy-neighbor policies could have easily taken hold. And although central bankers have a little less accountability than politicians, their behavior serves as a prime example of unity in challenging times. And finally, something that can be overlooked in arguments about TTIP, although I don't think that's necessarily the case in a room like this, but TTIP is a trade agreement that 90% of IOD members support. And it serves as a standard bearer for transatlantic unity. So rather than increasing the likelihood that chlorinated chickens will find their way onto European dinner plates, TTIP is essentially an extension, in my mind, of the EU's single market to the US. So if standards can be negotiated and agreed upon, TTIP, and in conjunction, hopefully, with TPP, can help to establish rules that can function as global standards. Europe has a chance to establish the rules that the global economy plays by. So although unity can be a problem if applied in every scenario, when it comes to some of the bigger issues of the day, like the well-being of the world economy, not just the West, but the world generally does better when it works together. Thank you again for the invitation to speak, and yeah, I'm done. Great.